Good afternoon. Hi. So I'm here today with Chief Dan Pengray of the Sammamish Police Department, and I'm Michaeline Fowler, and we are happy to be here today to talk about some of the new legislative changes that's come for Washington State policing. Earlier this year, right, Washington State legislature passed a series of police reform bills in response to sweeping calls nationally and locally as a result of the George Floyd death. These new policing policies were developed as an outcome of those reform bills. The new policies went into effect on July 25th, and Chief Pengray is here to give us an overview of those legislative changes, the new policies, and what this all means for our local community. Chief, if you want to start by just kind of giving us some background about how we got here.
Okay, appreciate it, Michaeline. So there's a lot of information, and I just want to try to highlight as much as I can so that people can start asking or making informed decisions and asking questions of us and of their legislatures about what the impacts are going to be. Again, just as a review, after the George Floyd tragedy and death, there was a lot of call for reform in law enforcement. And ultimately it ended up being a very broad, it was painted with a broad brush. And so the impact was for law enforcement throughout this country. And you will find from most law enforcement agencies that it's important that we always look at and assess how we do business and make sure that we're doing it right, doing it better, with the least amount of negative impacts to our community and individuals, such as George Floyd. So, understanding that, we wanted to be a part of these legislative changes that were being made in Washington State. Unfortunately, that didn't happen very well or very often throughout this process. And a lot of these changes that were made have some very impactful consequences to how we do business and potentially to our community members, our business owners, as we try to navigate our way through the changes. So that's, in a nutshell, that's why we're here. These all went into effect on July 25th. Actually, one of them went into effect July 1st, but I'd just like to give a little bit of an overview of each law. Then there's quite a few more than just what I'm going to talk about today, but just talk a little bit about each one, and then ultimately we'll talk about the policy changes that we've had to make and how that'll impact our response to calls for service, 911 calls, and crime in general.
Good. Okay. If you want to, go ahead and get started and tell us some things about the legislative changes. I think that is what people want to hear.
So one of the first ones is House Bill 1310, and that's use of force. And the biggest impact with that law is that law enforcement officers now can only use force to effect an arrest based on probable cause that a crime has occurred or is occurring. Those are changes from the past where we could use force to detain based on reasonable suspicion and with the idea that a crime may about to be committed. So it may seem subtle, but it's actually fairly significant. So, and we'll talk about how that impacts us, as far as our response. But the biggest piece is that we can only use force now in the event to make sure that we have probable cause to make an arrest. So, for example, if we respond to now incidents and events where in the past it was reasonable suspicion and we might want to stop someone, if we have a description, we want to make contact, there's suspicious activity occurring on the backside of a store or in a location, we can go and still make a social contact, try to find out what's happening. But if that person decides to leave and we don't have probable cause to make an arrest, and knowing that a crime's committed, we're going to let them leave. So much different, and the officers, I mean, the whole premise behind this is not to use, excuse me, improper force, and not to have tragic consequences. So appreciate it, but it has really limited what we can do and how we can do it. It's a different way of doing law enforcement now. We're gonna have to dance the dance a little bit better, but and we're learning as we go. The one of the big impacts here is, for example, if no crime has been committed, it actually says in a couple of these laws and the legislative changes that law enforcement will ultimately try to do everything they can to support and help and solve an issue and a problem. But if no crime has been committed and there's no imminent threat of serious injury or death, we are to leave. And so, for example, if someone's having a mental health crisis, or even a drug overdose, or some kind of crisis that's not criminal in nature, we will try to assist them. We will offer them resources. We will call for potentially mental health professionals if they're available, other counselors, even our own crisis intervention negotiators. But if ultimately they don't want help and there's no crime being committed, we will leave the scene. And that's going to be difficult, I believe, for people to see, especially when someone really appears to be struggling. But it's been made very clear in the legislation that we shall not use force to detain. We won't use force to put them on a gurney or help them to go anywhere. And if they choose not to, we will not be intervening, and we will actually leave the scene.
Wow. So the intent is good and to be hands off, but the consequences of it is pretty.
Well, the intent is to not use force when there's not something illegal. But we've already had incidents where someone's creating a disturbance because of a mental health crisis, and people are very concerned for their safety, but they don't want to go with us. They don't want us to be engaged with us. They don't want help. And then we leave. And then subsequently, a half hour later, now this person's down on the streets, chasing after cars or other things where people become even more concerned. And although we may have, for example, offenses in regards to being in a roadway, again, those are not areas where we're going to use force unless we truly feel they're a danger to others, again, depending on the traffic and the flow and those types of things. But it's not automatic where we would be able to detain, move someone out of an area that potentially could be dangerous for them, get some mental health counselors, and or get them to a hospital where they can gain additional resources. We aren't going to be doing that now.
Yeah, and so that's the consequence of kind of backing off.
Right. So that's just a House Bill 1310. House Bill 1054, which specifically addresses tactics. One of the big things there was no longer shall we use neck holds, neck restraints of any kind, and there's a bunch of different names that are associated with that, but it can only be used as a very last resort in the to save an officer's life, and even then, that's being questioned by different legal staff. So essentially, it's no neck restraint of any kind, period. And that's the way we're approaching it. In addition to that, is also there's a definition of military weapons, and that law enforcement should not use any surplus of military equipment or weapons as long as they're armored, etc. So we don't really have that. Our we call it the Bear and those types of things. Those are the vehicles that TAC will respond to provide safety. They're not armored in the sense of having weapons attached to them. It's just more from a protective nature to be able to get close to protect the officers that are responding. But also defined in that was that military firearms of anything over 50 caliber. And so that's impacted, and again, our legal counsel, legal advisors throughout the state have looked at that differently. And so one of the impacts there, and in our case with the King County Sheriff's Office, they have determined to turn in all of our shotguns, and that includes all of our less lethal shotguns and our blue nose rounds, because those weapons are all over 50 caliber. And so, as some legislatures stated, that was not our intent. The problem is the definition is fairly clear. Any firearm over 50 caliber is considered military and can't be used.
Even if it's less lethal.
It doesn't state that. And therein lies the problem with some of these legislative changes, is they're not clear whether that was intent, there was intent there or not. The problem is it's so broad that a lot of the legal advisors are interpreting it differently, and in our case, the determination was made to pull all of that equipment, including less lethal, which now that takes away a big tool for us to prevent the use of lethal force. So,
has that already been done?
yes, all of those items have been turned in, and we're no longer allowed to use those.
Okay.
So, the other piece of tactics is it's becomes very restrictive in pursuits. I know that that's been talked about on various radio stations and out in the newspaper. But essentially, other than having probable cause to make an arrest on serious felony crimes such as arson, rape, murder, kidnapping, we will not be doing any pursuits. And although that's not a huge difference from what we already had in policy, it really limits even thinking about doing anything more. The one exception to that is for DUIs, which states that if an officer believes that someone is under the influence, in a DUI scenario, that they can continue a pursuit. We can consider that, but the general direction there is we will not be doing pursuits for that either. So if
this is a
someone,
big change.
yes, so if someone flees the scene, regardless of whether it's traffic or in any type of property crime or even like on a shoplift and they get to a car and start to run, we are not going to use force.
In pursuit.
In pursuit.
Yeah.
We will not do that. And even in regards to the misdemeanor crimes, we're not going to escalate in regards to the use of force to try to stop somebody. So we'll do our best through other means and other investigative techniques to identify and then cite.
Okay. So this is all part of House Bill 1054, the tactics.
Correct.
Okay, so those are a lot of big changes.
Yes. The controlled substance under Senate Bill 5476, one of the big changes there is essentially knowingly possessing what was previously considered felony drugs is now a simple misdemeanor. And so we will no longer be doing, again, felony arrest on those. And the legislature has required that for at least the first 2 times that someone is contacted for possession of drugs under the new misdemeanor crime, that we are required before citing, arresting, and or sending it to the prosecutor's office, we're required to attempt to refer them to outside resources to get assistance. The problem is that as part of this bill, they wanted to put together a navigator system throughout the state, and obviously they want to have resources throughout the state that can support these people, and they just don't exist. In addition to that, has not been a system to be able to document from agency to agency who's been warned and who hasn't. So potentially it could just be a free ride over and over and over. One of our officers actually here in the city of Sammamish, Officer Sawtell, recognized that one of the programs that we have called Sector, that is used for issuing tickets and for completing traffic accident investigations, actually has the ability to capture all of that. And we've been working with State Patrol and other agencies throughout the county and ultimately the state, and hopefully that will address this and at least let everybody know what's happening and be able to track it like we've been asked to do within the legislature.
Okay.
So
That's also a big change as well. And that is Senate Bill 5476.
correct.
Okay.
And that's one for, here where I know people are very concerned about the fentanyl deaths we've had in the past and the overdoses, and now that's changed. Not that those things will still happen, but and perhaps we can still determine, investigate who sold those drugs, but actual possession of those things now is a simple misdemeanor.
So what happens if you do have a parent that calls up and they have found drugs in their kid's possession? How is that handled now?
We can still assist them in recovering those items, but whereas before we would put those for destruction, now we're not doing that because people are claiming various things about why they need it or they have it. And
So they're allowed to have it.
it's, again, certain drugs are no longer, the majority of drugs are no longer considered a felony, and it's just a simple misdemeanor crime. And so we can still help them, and we can offer them whatever resources we become aware of, but it's really going to be more dependent now on the families themselves to take those next steps to get the help.
Okay.
So and then a few of the other things here, House Bill 1223 and House Bill 1140, they talk about electronic interrogation, or electronic capturing things electronically through audio and ultimately video whenever interrogations are done. And whenever someone's been stopped and detained, that becomes, when we're then asking questions, it becomes more of an interrogation.
Okay.
So the sooner that we can begin audio interrogations, the better. And it is for any juvenile, misdemeanor or felony, and for any felony adult crime.
Okay.
And so the sooner that we're able to get body cameras, the better, because right now we don't have those tools other than through our cell phones.
Yeah.
And so
And I know this has been a want for you for a while.
yes. So we're still, but again, this became part of the law, doesn't specifically address video cameras, body cameras, and so, these are a lot of almost, again, these unfunded mandates. There's things that need to be done, but everybody's got to find their way of being able to financially support that and do what the law is asking us to do.
Yeah.
So
what does that mean here in Sammamish?
it's, well, again, we're dependent on cell phones now that aren't necessarily the most dependable, depending on many different things, and usually they're in a pocket, and then if somebody's trying to hold the cell phone or whether it captures it, so it's just not going to be as clean until we get body cameras. Once we're back, and it probably means more people are actually going to be transported back to the station instead of being released, because there we have the audio and visual capabilities, and that's just going to make a lot more sense in the investigative process.
Okay.
So ultimately, the second bill, which is juvenile access to attorneys, that goes into effect January 1st. And essentially what that means is that when we contact juveniles and we detain them, we cannot question them, and they cannot waive their right to an attorney until they have access to an attorney, and in most cases an attorney is present. Similar to the navigation program for resources for those individuals that have possess drugs. These programs don't exist. There's just not enough people. And so, again, unintended consequences there is that we could be detaining more and actually potentially booking more juveniles
Yeah.
as opposed to releasing at the scene, simply because we don't have any information. And so we'll have to develop that through investigative techniques in the field, and still, but not while we're detaining that person out there.
Yeah.
So,
So you have to bring them in and detain them to get the background on
right.
them.
And
Okay.
so, again, it just takes more police personnel while somebody's doing the interview, somebody is transporting, somebody's still working out in the field. It's just, it potentially can eliminate us being out there, being visible, making other, public safety, taking other public safety steps like traffic and
And
area
every
change.
juvenile has to be recorded now
yes,
as well. Okay.
for any detention of any crime, and ultimately it's going to need to be visual as well
Okay.
on any type of felony. And as of January 1st, they have to have an attorney no matter what.
Okay. Wow.
And then
Yeah.
last but not least is Senate Bill 5066 and 5051. That's a duty to, the first one is the duty to intervene. Again, I would say a lot of these legislative changes, we already addressed the majority of these in our policies. For example, the duty to intervene, we've always been expected to intervene if we see anybody using improper or illegal use of force in any way, shape, or form, regardless of whether within our own agency or another agency. And it subsequently we required to document, required to notify supervisors. So those things haven't really changed. It's just now codified in law that this shall be done. It was already done so within our policy. So not a big change there. The biggest change is the requirement by our department that if we see other agencies using force or violating our policy, that's what the law says now, we have to report it. We have a duty to report it. So for example, if the city of Redmond still uses less lethal shotguns, we would have to report that.
Okay.
So, and that's what the sheriff made a decision that through King County Sheriff's Office, which ultimately we are all contracted out through the King County Sheriff's Office, we follow that policy. So we would document and then send that up through our chain. They subsequently would notify, for example, the city of Redmond, we saw this.
Can you talk a little bit about why the policies are different per departments? Why King County will have different set of policies versus
Right.
Redmond?
And great point, and therein lies the issue, is that many of these legislative changes are very generic, and they, as I have said to our officers, it's kind of like a staircase. They all impact each other and intertwine. And again, whether intentional in regards to being very generic or not specific, and police officers always want details. They want specifics. They're not clear. And so legal advisors throughout the state for organizations that represent all law enforcement and then individual agencies are all over the map about their interpretation of imminent threat, de minimis use of force, physical force, pursuits, the DUI or not DUI, use of any weapons over 50 caliber, what was the intent of the legislation. If it's not clear in the law, regardless of what somebody is saying, then many are interpreting it then, well, the law states this, therefore we're stepping back, we're not doing these things. So they need to be cleaned up, they need to be cleared up, and the public can help us by notifying the legislators that, help us do a better job. And to make sure that we're not tiptoeing around these laws and legislation, and as a result either get somebody in the public hurt or a law enforcement officer hurt. We don't want that. We want to be able to respond. We want to provide services. We want to help. But this is new.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying it was intentional. I'm just saying it's new, and many different people have interpreted these laws differently.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be difficult why this is going on. And we in the city of Sammamish and the King County Sheriff's Office are taking a much more conservative approach as to what these laws mean and how we're going to react and respond. So again, in the interest of all parties concerned. So
because these policies are kind of left up to interpretation, so could someone encounter different policies here in Sammamish than if they travel to another city
absolutely.
in Washington?
Yes.
Okay, and it could be handled totally differently.
Correct.
Okay.
And so, for example, within the city of Sammamish, we are going to be very, very careful about using any force in any way when some people are in some sort of mental health crisis or some kind of addiction crisis. And again, we will do our very best to find resources. We will take the extra time. We will work with people. We will make the extra phone calls. But ultimately, because it's not a crime, we will also step away.
Yeah.
And again, I know people are going to be concerned about that. We've already had a scenario that was very difficult where there was a burglary in progress. We responded. The people got into the victims' cars and left the scene. Officers arriving saw the vehicles, and they were told not to pursue. And there's a big frustration from the homeowner, from the officers, because we want to. We want to do our due diligence and help these people, these victims, get their property back.
Yeah.
But the intent is to prevent tragedy because of a pursuit over property that potentially could have a negative outcome for the suspects, the officers chasing, and or third parties that could be the victims of a crash. So we understand it, but it's become almost an all or nothing.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground right now,
Yeah.
at least the way it's being interpreted. So
Okay.
I have asked within the city and of our officers, so this will be something different that people will see, is we're going to respond in numbers. Not responding in force, responding in numbers,
Okay.
so that we have more eyes and more brains to make good decisions, to really consider the laws and what we're doing and how we're doing it, and trying to take advantage of more people to somehow find the resources and to not have to use force in order to gain compliance and or find resources and support people in the community that are in crisis.
Can you talk a little bit, so showing up in numbers now, one of the questions we see quite a bit is how many officers do you actually have on duty at a time? That's one of the questions we see.
Right. So it varies. We have a minimum of 3, but in conjunction with just 3 patrol officers on duty, we almost always have at least 1 supervisor during the day, myself and Sergeant Elias, who's our number 2, the administrative sergeant, so that we're always monitoring. We have detectives, we have 2 motor officers, so all of them are available to respond. And then during certain times of the day, we have overlapping shifts, which then doubles all of that. So it could be a minimum of 6, 7, 8 officers, 2 sergeants on the street. So when I say in numbers, I really do expect, a minimum of 2 and a sergeant, or 3 to respond, so that again we can make informed decisions with multiple sets of eyes and multiple brains reviewing and looking at where we're at and what we're doing.
Do you feel like you have the numbers to do that, to show up the numbers?
Not necessarily, because as we do that, that means other calls are going to hold potentially for a long time, and we are not going to respond nearly as quick. You will see emergency response calls probably climb because more officers are going to be at single scenes to address those issues. That could then reduce the number of traffic stops that take place, the number of area checks at our parks, like during the summer when things are busy.
Yeah.
That can reduce those or limit those throughout the day. And if there are 911 calls that maybe are not a high priority, it will take longer to respond, because we want to make sure that we are following the law and therefore not using force, not creating a scenario where force may have to be used, where if we had more numbers, we could prevent that from happening. One officer, 2 suspects, potentially that could go sideways much quicker than,
You have the numbers.
we have the numbers. To even have, somebody make that decision, we need to back away. We need to step away, reset, restart, again, and following the rules, following the laws, and in everybody's best interest. But it really, what the public, and this is why we're doing this, what you as the public may see is going to be different. And it will be concerning at times. And all of our officers know that if you have questions, we want you to ask when it's safe to do so that we can explain to you why we're making the decision we're making. And again, it's going to be difficult for a while simply because it's new and it's not clear across the board. And we will continue to do our very best to make sure we get clear interpretation from the legal advisors, try to make that as consistent as possible throughout the state. But more important, we need our legislatures and you to tell our legislatures to help us make that clarification.
This is really good. So I just want to make sure you were able to get through all of the bill changes, correct?
There are others out there, and I guess, there's the last one I had mentioned, Senate Bill 5051, which is decertification.
Yeah.
And this is where, from an officer's perspective, it has a significant impact on their career, their livelihood, and ultimately their families. And so the changes are now that, well, in the past, if an officer used excessive force, was going to be fired, lied, any of those types of things, the agency would normally send the case up to the Criminal Justice Training Center, where they would look at decertifying the officer, meaning that they no longer would be could be a police officer in Washington State. Really would more than likely impact them trying to get a job as a law enforcement or peace officer throughout the country. So the new law allows the Criminal Justice Training Center to do an independent review on any use of force or essentially anything that we do. And that information doesn't need to come from the agency. It can come from anywhere. It can come from a resident's complaint. It can come from a news article that doesn't look good, and they can decide to do an independent investigation and make a determination as whether or not an officer will remain certified within the state. So their interpretation, which is different than, for example, King County Sheriff's Office interpretation, slightly, but they're still different, of use of force and probable cause. Those little differences potentially could make a huge impact on the career of a law enforcement officer. And that's where there's a lot of concern and consternation by officers about, well, what should we do and how do we do it? So that's why it's so important that we have clear, consistent clarification about all of these laws, not place blame, but get consistent clarification so that we can all respond in the best way possible to meet the laws and the needs of our community.
Yeah. And you touched on this a little bit already about how the policy changes are going to look to Sammamish residents. What's going to look different to them? One of the things you said is they may see that you're not necessarily taking someone in that's having a mental crisis at that time.
Right.
What are some of the other things that Sammamish residents are going to notice about these policy changes?
Well, again, if, for example, a crime is occurring, but it's a misdemeanor property crime, and someone doesn't want to stop we can try and effect arrest, but if that arrest and we can put hands on to affect that arrest. But if it starts becoming violent or it starts to go sideways, we're going to back off. And so when people see, someone's just committed a crime, whatever it might be, vandalism, shoplift, those types of things, it will be difficult. We are not going to use any extensive force to place that person into custody, because we again, this is all about not having another tragedy. And although with the many stops, the tens of thousands of stops and contacts every single day, it's rare. One is too many, and we understand that, and we understand what the intent of these laws was initially. So, but even with traffic, if someone is reckless driving, that doesn't fall under the allowing us to continue in a pursuit, or and so if someone's doing those types of things right in front of a large group, the public, and a police officer comes in and they go, we're not chasing after them. People are probably going to be upset about that. They're going to be frustrated about that, and it's understandable. If I was in my community and I saw that, I would be very frustrated that that person is not being detained, because they are and were dangerous. But once they've left, we're not, leaving, we're not going to continue that danger by pursuing. So it will stop.
Yeah, and so for your officers, how is this impacting them?
They're worried. They're worried about doing the right thing for the community, and they're worried about violating these laws. And then the microscope that we are now under in regards to the decertification process that the Criminal Justice Training Center can review, they're concerned. They're concerned about their livelihood and their families, and to be honest, they say, well, again, their freedom, and again, it's a reaction now, but it's an understandable one, and we're trying to work our way through it. But as I stated, we are going to respond, but we're going to respond differently. We'll respond in numbers. We'll take our time. We'll use de-escalation techniques, which is required by the law, and which we do and are well trained in, which includes time, distance, communication, backup, more officers. I mean, we're just going to start that way. We're not going to respond code on a lot of things now. We're going to take our time. We're going to get there, make sure all of us are there, observe, use our vehicles for cover, all those things to try and de-escalate a situation. Hopefully then ultimately have communication with an individual, especially if they're in a crisis, and try to work through that situation. The de-escalation piece is huge, and again, we're well trained, and we will use every resource possible to get people help. For example, if someone is down on a sidewalk, or if there's an overdose, we are going to go support fire, and we've had these conversations with them. We're going to support them in those medical type situations. Whereas before, often we were getting there early on, and then people were concerned about, well, in a police uniform, a law enforcement uniform, that can cause people to have anxiety and overreact. Again, and we don't want to then have to use force as a result of that anxiety, those concerns. So we're going to slow things down. And we're going to go where, and before aid would stage, we're now going to stage and support aid. Make sure that everyone's safe. The victim, fire, and our own officers. So those are the types of things that are going to change. And again, we're going to be in a support role for fire. We're not going to abandon them. and then, fire's going to have to look at where they feel they are, where they feel their safety is, and those will be policies and procedures that fire will then consider.
So one of the de-escalation techniques you mentioned is distance. So does that mean when you show up, you're going to keep distance? So you're going to be behind the car, behind some area where you're not actually hands-on approaching, and that may look different to residents as well.
Depends on the scenario. But we've always, in officer safety tactics, you slow down. You try not to park right in front of a house. You listen, find out what's happening. If possible, wait for your backup. Again, these things can all change quickly based on the dynamics of the scene. If someone's being injured, if someone's being attacked, we will have to step in. But now, it's more important that we slow things down. And so unless we see those, imminent threat of serious violence, injury, or death, we're literally going to just slow things down. And we're going to document that. And that's why it's important, again, that we get body cameras so that we can document and even articulate. We are stopping, we're 500 yards away from a residence. We are watching. The person appears to be agitated or concerned. Our vehicle, we've turned our vehicle so that we've created some barriers so that we don't appear or come across as or create anxiety for the person in crisis. So we're just going to slow things down. And again, a victim or a family of a person in crisis may say they need help now. You need to come here and help. We need to make sure that they're safe and we're safe and that we're following these laws, and we are going to slow down and use all de-escalation techniques possible to meet their needs.
Okay, so we do have some questions that came in. Before, I just want to make sure that you covered the basics of the new policy changes and the legislative changes. And then also, now that these have gone into effect, how is it rolled out? How are all officers on the same page now?
It's lessons and learning in progress. We are, again, we're tiptoeing a little bit because we don't want to make mistakes. And so we have had training within the department, a lot of conversations from the legal advisors, sheriff, others. We've talked to WASPIC, which represents all the chiefs and sheriffs throughout the state. We've talked to other agencies. We've looked at the policies, how they're implementing their policies, and they're all a little bit different. So, but they all go into effect now. The laws are law, and so we have to operate within the scope of obeying the law, and then the policies and procedures as our legal advisors have determined them. So
it's going to be tricky for a while.
A little while, yes.
So are you ready to answer some questions that we received?
Yeah, and hopefully I've answered the majority of those. Because I was aware of some of those, but and we'll go ahead and see if we need to clarify anything.
Yeah, so we had some questions that came in ahead of time, and then also I'm just going to check. We also have some questions that have come in since we've been discussing this as well. So we'll go over some of those questions too.
Okay.
About how much do body cams cost per officer? Not just buying the cameras, but everything that comes with it, the storage, I'm assuming with it, the staffing of it.
Right, and those are the numbers those are some of the unknowns. I mean, a body camera itself, I think, is $600 to $800, something like that. It's somewhere in that range. Like anything, there's lots of different ones out there. You can get grants for some pieces and parts of this, but it's not just that. There's the storage, which everybody's like, well, that's not a big deal. Well, it's a lot. I mean, if you're on a major scene and you have 10, 15 officers out there, and all of them have body cameras that are going, and you're there for 2-3 hours, or more. If it's a homicide scene or a serious crime scene and major crimes investigators are out there, and you have other officers on the outside of that scene that will continue to be there with body cameras, and then somebody wants all of that data, it's significant. So all of that has to be put in storage on, when all the IT work associated with that and the equipment associated with storing those files. And then you have the public disclosure request, which I don't think people recognize, but in our state, essentially anybody can ask for anything, anytime, and over and over and over again. And they can ask for it back since 1856, when I think that's when the county went into effect, and anything that's there. So when that happens, people in records have to go through all of that. And then not only does it have to ultimately be provided, but then it also has to be gone through so that we're not providing victims' names, personal addresses, a lot of the personal information that just shouldn't go out there. And by law, it doesn't have to go out there, but they have to go through every single piece of that. In addition, you have, anytime there's any kind of a complaint, once you have body cameras, the sergeants, the captains, the internal investigations personnel all have to go through all of that data as well and review it, every bit of it, so that then they can do a thorough investigation. So the time, in addition to the equipment to store all of these video files, is significant. And large agencies such as ourselves, Seattle, others, most of them don't have that, or they just have to put a significant amount of money and personnel, hire new personnel to be able to meet those needs.
Okay. Yes, there's a lot that comes with getting the body cam, a lot of cost and staffing.
We're not opposed to it.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
I know you really.
In fact, the officers are begging for them.
Yeah.
It's the financial piece, and that's a real world issue.
Yeah, and I know it's something that you've really been wanting. So the next question is about city laws versus the state laws. Is there something that the city can do to pass their own laws if it opposes the new state laws?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
City can be more restrictive in some cases, but they can't change these types of things. So it's even these laws, and these laws are all going to be tested in court. It'd be better if we could do it through the legislator and clean things up, but they're ultimately all going to get codified through, they're going to go to court, and then the laws will be tweaked as a result. And so it's important that the sooner that happens, that we can make these adjustments, the better.
Yeah. I just want to do a check to see if we have any other questions. Okay. I think that's going to be all the questions we have. Okay. And then I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay.
And so I know that you're going to prepare something that residents can find on the Sammamish Police Department's website, right?
Right. So what we'll try to do is similar to the conversation today, is we will do a quick overview and how we here in the city of Sammamish, the city of Sammamish Police Department, will be operating under that House bill or Senate bill. And we'll do our best to create links so that the public can actually look at those bills, research, understand them, and provide feedback to us and also to their legislatures if they believe that some of these changes should be tweaked or modified. So we will do our best to keep people informed, and the intent is we will provide an update to the council as well. So we'll be doing that soon, just so council can ask questions, and anything that might be specific, we can address that as well.
Okay. If you don't mind answering one more question. I
Sure.
think someone had a specific question about catalytic converter thefts. that are happening. As car owners, besides spending money to install shields, what can Sammamish Police do when a theft has been reported? What can car owners do to prevent the theft since it's happening at shopping locations, parks, trailheads, etc.? If the perpetrators are caught, to what extent is the law enforced, and what is the usual outcome?
A lot of pieces to that question. So, obviously, parking your vehicle so this is different than don't leave items in your vehicle that make it inviting for criminals to break in and take your purse, your debit cards, etc. So this is ongoing, and it has peaks and valleys like any other crime. People that become very good at it, and they can do it very quick, and then they break the materials down within the catalytic converters, and then they sell that. So there's a couple of different pieces. We know where most of that goes, so we try to track it down that way, and we try to work with the businesses that ultimately deal with those precious metals as well. Oftentimes it's the same people committing the crime, and so as we develop probable cause to make an arrest based on video, eyewitnesses, etc., then we can try and make an arrest. In most cases, those arrests, unless we do a search warrant and locate this specifically, they are going to go through the court system, through the prosecutor's office. It is a big issue, and there's a lot of problems with it just because of the chemicals and things that are used as well. So there's some danger associated with that, just where they're breaking it down and where they're breaking it down, and the environmental impacts that has. So the prosecutor's office does take it seriously, and the detectives make sure, especially when we have prolific catalytic converter thieves, that we try and follow through and do the best investigation possible so that they can be prosecuted.
Okay, and
So.
you also looking at where they're selling it.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, we know areas that it takes place, so we try to do our best to make sure that officers are patrolling those areas. We at the parks, at trailheads, those types of things. If people can park in areas that are highly visible to others, and then people just pay attention to their to their neighbors and what's going on. And again, don't hesitate to call 911. We're going to respond, but we're not stopping our response. It's just how we respond, and ultimately what we do once we're there is going to be different. But we are going to respond and do our best to, at a minimum, based on just being there, try to reduce crime.
And that's a really good point. People shouldn't hesitate to call 911.
No.
If you see or witness a crime, call 911.
Yes.
It seems to be hesitancy to call 911. There's also a non-emergency, and you can also report online as well.
You can report crimes online. So if there was a vandalism, your vehicle's broken into, and those things. And I would encourage doing that, because we still get that information. And if there's specific details, you can follow up and with the detectives if the case is assigned, if there's some type of evidence that we can follow up on. So don't hesitate to use that online reporting. We also, again, 911 and a non-emergency line ultimately go to the same location. So calling 911, the communications center will push it in the direction it needs to go, so that you can get the quickest response possible, and that we can support. So.
Okay, so this has been a great chat. Thank you, because this really, I feel like, lays out what happened. And so we have one more question.
Will the bills affect ride-alongs with police officers?
Oh, yeah. So ride-alongs with police officers, would this be affected anyway? Does the bills affect that anyway?
No.
Okay, so people can still request a ride-along. Okay.
So.
And okay.
So, I was just asked to do something, but
Yeah.
so for example, on ride-alongs, we have explorers as part of our department, and that is an opportunity for young men and women at high school age up all the way through the age of 21 that come in and can learn about law enforcement, and it gives them an opportunity to understand what we do, which is great. Some of them are interested in becoming peace officers as once they get through college and graduate. Others just want to understand what we do and want to be a part of the community. And so the explorers work with various events throughout the community. The city takes advantage of them. They're not paid. They do this again as a community service where they get to learn about law enforcement and they get to give back to the community and work at a bunch of events. And they get to have some fun too. They get to go do through like an Explorer Academy. They have Explorer competitions between other groups throughout the state. And so they get to learn a lot. It's a great organization, good interaction for our youth and young adults, and an opportunity again for us to continue to have interaction with our community. So hopefully we'll do something. That's a chance for again our youth community to get involved, and then hopefully as COVID is addressed, we still want to do a resident academy, and we'd like to do those on a regular basis here at the city of Sammamish, and where it's an opportunity for people to join in usually once a week for a period of 6 to 8 weeks and get to learn all about the Sammamish police and what we do and how we do it. They get a chance to go to the range, vehicle operations, and then understand and then get to meet and talk and ask questions of major crimes unit, the special operations, the SWAT teams, the air, marine units. So just a chance to really understand what we can do for the community and how we do it.
And so more information about the Academy will be next year. Is that when you're thinking?
Right. We're just trying to monitor what's happening with COVID. And it continues, obviously, changes. And since most of that would be done indoor, we want to make sure that everybody's safe. And so as soon as we can get moving forward on that, we're prepared to do so, and we'll make sure that people are aware of that and really encourage people to sign up, and we'll try to do it as often as possible to give more people an opportunity to join us.
And then tonight is National Night Out, but because of COVID restrictions, there's no formal activities. We want to talk a little bit about that?
No formal activities, and we do have a couple of neighborhoods and people that are getting together, and I'm not sure if fire's going to be out and about driving around. If they see those gatherings, stop by and say hi. I know our officers will be doing that, and the couple of groups that are going to try and do some outdoor activities, we're going to swing by and say hello and really appreciate everyone doing that. Again, the whole concept is interaction with your fire services, law enforcement, and oftentimes our city staff as well, just to make sure that we're engaged. And then the big piece is that communities, neighbors get to know each other, see each other, talk to each other, and then when there is an issue or there is a problem, there's actually you know who your neighbors are, and you can call them to watch your house, to be aware of things, and interact, and again hopefully help prevent any issues and to enhance a feeling of public safety and community.
It's very timely that we are discussing these new laws and policies, and we also are talking about National Night Out, because that really brings the whole police and community partnership together, and that's what we want. That's what we're aiming for. It's a good partnership.
Yes, and so the fact that some people are able to get together in their neighborhoods is great after a year and a half of a lot of heartache and issues for people, and we really look forward to next year getting back up to speed and engaging with all of our residents on a regular basis.
And I've been talking to some of your officers, and we're going to do some profiles this month. We're going to keep going with the National Night Out and the police community partnerships, and we're going to be profiling some of the officers on our social media and our e-news for the month of August. We did a proclamation last month that we're going to put into the chat that you can see as well to just recognize and acknowledge our Sammamish police officers. And so we're going to keep that going for the month of August.
Well, we appreciate that very much, and I'm lucky. As chief here, I have a tremendous group of people that I work with. I mean, within the city here, it's fantastic, and the support of the community has been amazing. But we really have some fantastic officers, young and experienced, that they want to be here. They like to be here. They like to engage with the community, and they're great to work with on a daily basis. I mean, it's as many difficult times as we've all had. As I've told people, it's great for me to come to work on a daily basis and be able to laugh with the people that I work with, and still smile and engage and have good working relationships, and do our best to go out and make an impact in the community, a positive impact.
Yeah, a good positive impact. Yeah. And so in chat, we're going to have a couple links to go to, and one of those is going to be as well. I think next week is when you'll have one line, kind of outline for.
Yeah, we should be able to put that together by then.
Yeah, so we'll put a link in the chat to the Sammamish Police Department's website, and that's where that will be posted next week.
Right. I guess just one final thing is, so our use of force policies are all online. People can. All of our policies are online. So the public can access all King County Sheriff's Office General Orders Manual, which is our policies, and they can access those. And so you can go through all of these: the duty to intervene, our use of force, our pursuit policy, our Miranda warnings, and how we have to now maintain audio and visual communication. So all of that is online.
Yeah.
Put that in conjunction with the bills, you can kind of get a good idea of where we're at. Again, our policies are somewhat different than what the state law says in regards to the wording and how things are clarified. Things like de minimis use of force is nowhere to be found in state law, but our legal advisors have now stated, though, we can use de minimis use of force for, quote, these things. So that'll give a chance for the public to take a look at that and see why there is variation, even within our own agency, compared to what state law says. So,
And
again,
we'll
we're learning.
And we'll put a link to the King County policies as well on the site as well. And so everyone can check that out all together.
Perfect.
Any final thoughts?
No, I just, I would ask people to continue to become informed and educated in all of this and what we do. Please don't ever hesitate to ask our officers or myself or Sergeant Elias questions. We won't always have the exact answers that you might want to hear, but we will be transparent and we'll go forward.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been very informative.
All right. Thank
All
you.
right, thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thanks.
Bye. Here we go.